is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Novice by Trudy Canavan, brought to you by Ashleigh. Chapters 27, 28, 29, 30, and 31. In these chapters, Dannyl is starting to wonder things about himself that I feel like are true. And also, Sonea actually manages to escape two different instances of Regin trying to do things to her that are frankly unforgivable, and I'm starting to wonder if Regin is the serial killer. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Natasha. These chapters, guys, I was tempted, there are times where I sort of feel like stopping at a certain point feels right when you're reading. Like there's, technically you could read a little bit more and go over the 50 pages, but you feel like the arc of the story, finished at this chapter. So you kind of want to stop there. And I did that recently for I think it was 5th season. But I sort of stopped a little early and I was like, was that the right decision? And then once I started talking about it, I barely had enough time to talk about everything. So I was like, okay, you know what? That was a good call. And I'm a little concerned this time because I hope that I have enough time, because I read just over 50 pages, even though I could have stopped a little sooner because I really needed to know what happened. And I'm actually really glad that I read that next one because it includes the second confrontation with Regin where he's got props with him. And I needed to at least read one instance of that where he gets bested, even though I'm sure she'll pay for it. But I just needed it. I needed a win. You know what I mean? Especially seeing as next week is Christmas week and I am taking the whole week off for vacation. So I'm not going to get to follow up on what happens here for over a week. So I needed something to like sort of make me feel like I was leaving things in a victorious position. So I'm going to start off with 27, where Sonea is friends with Tayend, the librarian, the head librarian. So Tayend is great. She is really understanding of Sonea in a lot of ways. And I feel like probably being a woman in the environment that she is like helps her to grasp the overall feeling of, oppression that Sonea feels. I'm sure Sonea coming from the slums is a whole other layer of everything, but this is a patriarchal society, definitely. So I like that she's befriended a woman who is of note and has a position that, requires respect. I also like the fact that apparently Sonea being a slum dweller is not a factor for her because she treats her with just as much respect. And one could argue she's doing that because of like who Sonea's sponsor is, her guardian is now. But I think that she was doing this already. I think that, Sonea would feel that and she doesn't seem to. So, and I also really like the fact that, she's a little bit more personable in like a personal way than anybody else has been so far. So it feels like even though, a teacher should not be like friends with a student, I think that's tends towards being kind of a bad idea. I feel like she is as close to a friend as Sonea has at the moment, and she needs somebody. Good God, Sonea needs somebody, Rothan had been one of the only ones. And now she's not really allowed to talk to him at all. And everybody else in all of her classes is ganging up against her. And I am relieved that Sonea has found somebody who is willing to treat her like a human being. The bar is so low. Hashtag bar so low. You know what I'm saying? So Sonea's helping her out with putting a lot of the books away, and with just sort of like sorting and categorizing things. It's notable that we find out a little bit later in a later chapter when Dannyl is visiting a crazy ass library that that's like a personal library that this rich guy owns, that these libraries here at the guild do not have any sort of card system to track things. There's no Dewey Decimal System. And I find that frankly shocking. I just never stopped to really think about when we began to employ that method of organization for books. And the guild, like, I think Dannyl, when asked why they don't do it, says something about how, like, one of the people in charge didn't see the point of it. And it just blows my mind. Like, as somebody who loves to organize things, indeed, loves to organize to the point of procrastinating on doing things that really need doing in favor of organizing garbage, I cannot understand that position, feeling that this isn't worth the time. The number of books that they have, maybe the guild library isn't as big as I think it is, but even if it's not, I feel like there does reach a point where you've got to get that system in place before the library grows to a certain size and that job becomes an overwhelming task. And the fact that they don't have that already set up is just banana pants. And I know I'm focusing on something that I really don't need to because I'm going to be pressed for time throughout this episode, but I just needed to say it. What are you doing, guild? You know, is it that magicians are like, sort of like artists in that they, just don't really have like, you know, you don't expect for there to be a lot of like order to the way that they handle things? Because that doesn't seem like how the rest of the school is. All right. So anyway, I just had to mention that because I didn't really think about it in these scenes where she's talking to Taya, because I just assumed that was in place and just wasn't mentioned, because why would you? So once we get to the later thing and it's revealed that that's not actually an issue, then Martin is saying, why do you need a sorting system when you can go Accio book title? But they can't. Nobody has ever done that in this world, have they? They all have to go through and find the book that they need. Like, that's not actually how it works here. So unless it is, and I just haven't seen it, but, so they come across this, cabinet that's filled with books that are, really, really old. And the glass in the doors has like mesh in it so that you can't just break it and reach in there. And everything is super valuable. There's a lot of magic also laid on this cabinet so that you can't magically open things. And she mentions that in that cabinet, she heard tell that there is a map of the passages under the university. And Sonea is like, no shit, really? And then this woman says, so Jellin said, but I suspect he was just teasing me. Sonea looked sideways at Taya. Teasing you? The librarian's face reddened and she straightened and turned away. It was many years ago, when we were much younger. It's hard to imagine Lord Jellin was ever young, Sonea said. He's so stern and disapproving. Stopping at a chest, Taya took the books Sonea was carrying and stacked them inside. People change, she said. He's grown much too full of his own importance, as if being a librarian was as important as, say, being the head of warriors. Sonea chuckled. Director Jarek would say knowledge is more important than anything else, so as caretaker of the guild's knowledge, you are more important than the higher magicians. So, of course, this causes Taya to warm to her even more. But that was a little detail that I find kind of, like, distractingly tantalizing, because there feels like there's a history there. It feels like there's the suggestion that Taya and Jellin were involved, and something happened to cause him to, like, decide that she wasn't good enough for him, or he just, like, got so serious about something. Like, there's a real vibe that I'm getting from her and the way that she talks about it, and that feels like she's got a lot of fond memories and regret And I'm wondering if that's going to be anything, or, you know, if it's just a little like side bit to give flavor to this character. So Sonea, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is just sort of laying the groundwork, this scene, for the fact that the two of them get along and that Taya trusts Sonea. So then let's go to Rothan. He gets the letter from Dannyl, a reply letter. It's taken 7 weeks for him to get it. So it's been 2 full months, very nearly, by the time this part of the story has started. And I'm just really trying to keep that in mind, because that's something I'm notoriously bad at. I think writers are notoriously bad at making things like that clear, unless it's really crucial to the story itself. And I'm really sad at having that kind of perspective of understanding that even though I'm reading it in the very next chapter, that plenty of time may have passed between this chapter and the last. So I really appreciate that we're given specific, you know, measures of time. So Dannyl's letter to Rothan. It was a pleasant surprise to hear from you, old friend. I have indeed been traveling about the lands, meeting people of different races, cultures, and religions. You know, just talking about his travels. He says some words about how obviously Rothan must have prepared Sonea really well if the High Lord noticed her. He's bummed that he missed Dorian's visit. And then he says, with this letter is a little information I have gathered from the Great Library and a few other sources. I hope it is of use to you. I do greatly appreciate the irony of your new interest. If my next journey is successful, we may have even more to add to our book. Your friend, Dannyl. Leafing through the sheets of paper, Rothan muttered in amazement. All this? The splendid temple? The tombs of white tears? Lol. Just a few other sources, huh, Dannyl? And I'm really curious because he says, I appreciate the irony of your interest, but he doesn't expand on that. And I don't feel Rothan being like, whoa, I wonder what he meant by that. So does Rothan know, like, that was a little confusing to me, because I would assume Rothan doesn't know Laurelin sent Dannyl for this trip because he wants him to research the High Lord. So his comment about the irony of it, I would expect to get Rothan's attention, and yet it does not seem to. But yeah, I'm just really, I don't know. There was something about that felt strange to me. So he hides the letter, and when he goes to the door, Yalden and Israel are there. Lord Yalden and Lady Israel. There is a bit of a lead-in here to a subplot involving Rothan and basically a drug addiction. And I really I did not expect this, and I did not see this coming. Rothan says, well, first, they invite Rothan to have dinner with them every first day. And when he's sort of like, really, every single one? She says, yes, we know it was a shock for Sonea to be taken from you. She never comes to visit, which must be so disappointing after all you did for her. And she says, you know, you shouldn't be spending every evening alone. And Dannyl is even abroad. You need somebody else to talk to. And Tanya says, you started taking Nemen again, Israel added in a low voice. Don't be angry at her for telling us. She's concerned about you, and so are we. So this is like, Nemen is the drug that he was taking to sleep, which of course, you know, when I read that in that other chapter, I assumed that was like a rare thing, a one-time thing. And apparently it's not. It's something that he used to do after his wife died, apparently. And the fact that he has started to do it again is like a bad sign. Like probably that was a pretty bad time in his life. And I appreciate his friends like being aware and stepping in. And I like that Tanya is worried enough about him to let them know about it. And I think they're right that like, not even necessarily just the fact that loneliness is a very real thing, but also just the sheer distraction of having other people to talk to get his mind off things and tire him out. It's really easy. I've noticed this myself working from home. It's really easy to, like, engage in sort of cerebral work all day, and then when it's time to go to bed, your mind is racing, but your body isn't tired because your body has been sitting still all day. And Rothan is somebody who I feel like could do that, where he'd be studying or doing, and his mind is racing, but he doesn't actually like go and engage with people and do the things that expend enough energy to tire your body. And I feel like at the very least that could be helpful if they would take him for walks and stuff, tire the dude out, get him active. And I'm hopeful because he does keep taking it. We have a later moment when he takes it that I'm growing concerned about him also. And I'm not sure if Sonea will be able to tell something's going on with him. Like if Nemen is a common enough thing that you can tell the signs are there, or if she'll hear it through the grapevine or what. So yeah, I'm a little worried about that. So Sonea, here comes the first attack. This is really just so awful. Basically, they've gotten to a point where they chase her and she's literally running away from them, which for me, that adds a new layer of like humiliation to it. It's bad enough that they like jump her and she has to sort of take it. I don't entirely understand still why she doesn't want Acheron to know about it. But as we see later, Acheron knows and doesn't do anything. So even if she told him, it wouldn't change. But I don't really understand still her motivation for not saying anything to him. But yeah, they run and chase her. And the whole way that this goes down is just embarrassing because she keeps thinking that she's going to be able to outsmart them and go in a direction that they didn't anticipate, or that she'll be able to walk quietly enough that she doesn't attract their attention when she's like trying to pass. And of course, none of that works. 13 novices are there this time. 13. And when they get her down finally with all the sunstrikes, he gets handed this box and it's full of what seems like, what smells like the dung of some animal wrapped up in like colored paper to make it look like candy. And what he is planning on doing, Regin, is forcing her to eat shit in front of everybody. And she is thinking to herself that she's going to spit them out at him. But I'm just like, the fact that you are planning on doing something that involves them being in your mouth in the first place, you lost already, girl. You lost. Like, spitting them back at him is not gonna matter. Like, it's not preserving your dignity in any way. It's already gonna have gone too far. Thankfully, this is stopped by the sudden appearance of Lord Yikmo, which, I swear to God, guys, I can't tell you the anxiety I was having and how much I wanted to, like, praise the heavens when he showed up. And yeah, Lord Yikmo is like, excuse me, what the fuck are you doing? You're not supposed to be fighting outside of lessons. And they are like, well, we were just playing. And he's like, playing with sunstrikes? Yeah, no, I don't think so. And essentially he knows exactly what the fuck is going on. He lets them all leave, which I don't care for. I really feel like this school generally is bad with discipline. And it makes me anxious that these people can continue to get away with this shit. And even like the somewhat mild punishment of Regin being allowed to, like, he was taking those private classes and they were taken away from him. He was allowed to take it back up again after only like a couple weeks of being off it. I am not impressed with the way that anybody handles things at this school. They're not using discipline enough at all. And for people who have like magical powers, I feel like you ought to be more strict than anything. And they're just so fucking lenient considering like how conservative the school is supposed to be. I'm just kind of disgusted, to be honest, at this point. And he tells her like, don't worry, it won't happen again. But she says, well, please don't tell anybody though. And he's sort of surprised by that. And then he asks her, why didn't you strike back? And she says first, what use would that be? And he says, well, if you like, I mean, most people would just do it out of pride. They would strike back, but maybe you stopped yourself because of pride. And then he says, well, if you had targeted them, you could have left them as exhausted as you, and it would at least be a discouragement to the others. And she says, well, if the smaller novices have no inner shields, I could hurt one of them. And he's glad that she says that she's like considering whether or not she could really hurt somebody when she's engaging in self-defense. Like, she still isn't interested in hurting them, even though I think they would deserve it, but whatever. And then she says, would you be so eager to strike if you'd seen a boy die at the hands of magicians? And then he says, so that's it. And she looks at him and is just like kind of horrified that he seems triumphant about having figured this out when there's like somebody who died, and that triumph feels so inappropriate to her, and she just leaves even though he's calling her back. And later on she goes and apologizes to him, and what he does is he has her go to the arena with him and basically practice her strikes on the arena boundary, because it's the kind of like invisible dome that sort of lights up when it's hit, so that she isn't going to be as concerned about what the, consequences are. She's just hitting the dome, and the dome can take a lot more power than she has before it breaks. So she's able to kind of let loose and really hit it with everything that she's got, and not have to worry about hurting someone. So I really like that approach that Yukmo was like, oh, she's just afraid to do to someone what she saw happen to that other kid. So I'll just put her in a situation where that's not a concern. And, and I also appreciate the fact that when she like goes to see him, she, I'm sorry. I'm like trying to turn off my buzzing from my text messages. I appreciate the fact that when she goes and sees him later, she apologizes, even though I don't really feel like it was totally necessary. But I like that she decides to play the game a little bit. And I'm hoping that Lord Yukmo and her have a pretty good relationship going forward. So, okay. Let's go to the 28, A Secret Plan. Lorelin goes out onto the roof with Acheron, and apparently they were planning on getting some time by themselves where nobody could listen out on the roof. But Lord Yukmo is up there, and he tells Acheron about the whole thing. And I'm really irritated by the fact that Acheron just says that he asks first how many there were, and when Yukmo says, I can identify most of them, Acheron says that won't be necessary. There's no need to bring further attention to the incident. Thank you for informing of this, Yukmo. So that means that all he wants to know is how strong she's getting. It's not about keeping her safe. It's not about worrying about whether, and that's for me, like, I've been trying to maintain this like weird benefit of the doubt for Acheron as much as like he's doing awful things like fucking invading Lorlin's mind. I was trying to sustain a sort of like disbelief that he was doing what everyone thinks he's doing. But this coldness in the face of her being tormented is something that like I really can't forgive. And I don't know why I draw the line in the sand here. I suppose it's because this is like something that I don't really understand his motivation. Like, is he hoping that by leaving her to be tormented, that will force her power to grow more quickly? I mean, it could be, but that's just such an inhumane way to handle it. Meanwhile, Lorelin is looking at Acheron and notices that Acheron really does not look well. His skin is like the wrong color and even like paler than usual. And he has shadows under his eyes, like he hasn't been sleeping. And I'm wondering if that has anything to do with anything. I still don't believe that Acheron is the one killing people out there, though. As much as As much as his coldness here makes me dislike him more, I still haven't quite gotten to that point. But I don't really have any idea what this could mean. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here because there's that thing that happens later with Sonea running into him, and I'm super curious about that also. And Lorelyn here is talking about how they were such rivals, him and Acheron, when they were in school. And Acheron's sort of saying, like, you know, I know that it was a little hard on us, but I also think that the rivalry forced me to be a better magician sooner. It really spurred me to advance more quickly. And Lorelyn says, all right, maybe it was good for you, but there's nothing good about being second place. Next to you, I may as well have been invisible, at least when it came to the ladies. If I'd known we'd both end up bachelors, I wouldn't have been so jealous of you. Jealous? Acheron's smile faded. He turned away to stare at the horizon. No, don't be jealous. The reply was so faint, the administrator wondered if he had really heard it. Lorelyn opened his mouth to ask why he shouldn't be, but Acheron's gaze had slid to the ruined lookout. How are Davin's plans for the lookout going? And he just completely changes the subject, and Lorelyn doesn't, press the issue, but I'm dying of curiosity. Dying. I want to know so bad. Okay. Let's go to Dannyl and Tayend. Dannyl and Tayend are heading out to do a series of errands, which mostly involves going to the houses of nobles and testing out the family members there that seem to have magic and seeing if they would be acceptable to the guild. But there's also the investigation of the High Lord and his past, and they're sort of not really sure exactly where to head next. And then they start talking about this country called Sachaka, which I don't feel like we've heard about at all previous to this. But apparently Sachaka is on the other side of the mountains and is an empire unto itself. And we get a little history lesson here. The Sachakan Empire wasn't old enough to call ancient, but it was a highly magical society. And he may have discovered references to even older cultures. And Dannyl says, I doubt there's much left to find in Sachaka. What the guild didn't take after the war, it destroyed. Tayend's brows rose. That was nice of them. Dannyl shrugged. It was a different time. The guild was newly formed, and after the horrors of the war, the magicians were determined to prevent another. They knew that if they allowed the Sachakan magicians to keep their knowledge of magic, there would be a never-ending war of vengeance between the two countries. So they left it a wasteland? Partly. Beyond the wasteland, there is fertile soil, farms, and towns, and Arvis, a capital. I've never heard anyone say Acheron went there. And Tayend is like, well, I mean, if he did, why would he keep it to himself? Maybe he just spent the in-between years in idleness and was too embarrassed to tell anybody, or he was doing something that the guild wouldn't approve of. And then he says, or perhaps he fell in love with a young Sachakan boy and was eventually found out and expelled from the country. And Dannyl's sort of like, oh, come on, dude, don't start with this. And of course, Tayend is sort of like, oh, what, really? Do you find it offensive if I suggest that he likes guys? And Dannyl replies with a very even-handed response of, I respect him and his position, and if he would be offended by what you were saying, or if his position was threatened by what you were saying, then I'm going to discourage it. And then Dannyl says, besides, it's impossible. He's a really powerful magician, and you think the Sachakans would have expelled him? I doubt it. So this whole thing just brings up a whole new sort of factor to consider, because having a whole country that was basically conquered and had their magic taken in a way, or at least the knowledge of their magic taken, that feels like a really particular kind of grudge And I can't think how that might factor into what's going on with Acheron now, but I feel like it has to. I feel like this is the key to it all, and I don't know how. So they're talking about from here what they're going to be doing, and Dannyl realizing that like the errands that he's going to have to run means that he's going to have to wind around the whole country, and that there will be like tons of places where there are no libraries, that there's not a lot of like comforts, and he won't be able to like head back until the summertime. So this is a really fucking long trip. There's just so much potential for things to happen here. And I'm worried. I'm worried because both of them don't seem to know what they're into. And I'm worried because I want to trust Tayend so much, and I still don't. And I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think this is an indicator of good writing when you care about characters so much that it's making you want to not see what's probably right in front of your face. So I just want, you know what I want, guys? I want them to be together. I want Dannyl and Tayend to work out. And I feel like that can't happen because of the way that Kiralia is, unless Dannyl never returns to Kiralia, which maybe is for the best. But that's where I'm at with this. So, and they're starting also towards Tayend's sister's place first. And we meet her a little bit later, and she finally says the thing that I have been thinking, which is that I'm pretty sure Tayend has a massive crush on you, BT Dubs. So if you are not also interested, please just be careful in the way that you handle him, and don't lead him on, and don't indulge him too much and give him like either false hope or cause him to care even more for you. Just be aware of his feelings and try and handle him as best you can. That's basically because, Dannyl sort of asks her, like, well, what do you want from me, though? If this is true, because it never even occurred to Dannyl, and he's a little bit like a combination of completely shocked because he never thought that Tayend felt that way about him. And he's also flattered and like pleased. And then he starts to ask himself, why am I pleased? And then there's the moment of him like considering, maybe I am. And then he pushes the thoughts away. And it's written as like he pushed the thoughts away yet again, just the way that he did when he was younger. And, he was just talking earlier about the fact that he has never met a woman that interested him. And that is not to say that like, somebody can be asexual. Somebody can just be not really interested, period. But this feels much more correct that like he was persecuted really early on for potentially being gay, even when he did not yet know it. And he knows what the price is and has decided to just completely squash that portion of himself and not look at it. And the rumors are already starting, as we see when we go back to Rothan having that conversation with, I forget his name. Is it Yalden that time too? It might be. And so like nothing has even happened between the two of them, and people already are talking. So on the one hand, I like really want Dannyl to be, I want him to be free and open and out and happy. But on the other hand, with the way the rumors are already sort of circulating, I'm like, how much worse could things get for him though if he did come out? Like, Tayend isn't even out. It's common knowledge among everyone, but that's not really the same thing. It's like an open secret versus like being out. And I'm just really not there aren't a lot of options open to them, you know? I don't know. And it turns out that, like, the guy that Dannyl thought Tayend was into from the party is jealous. And not jealous of Dannyl in that he doesn't seem to realize that Tayend likes Dannyl, but he's, like, annoyed with Dannyl because he feels that if Dannyl and his, intolerance weren't around, that Tayend would be paying him more attention than he is. And it's actually that Tayend just doesn't really like the guy very much. Which, again, Dannyl is, like, pleased to hear that he doesn't like him. So, I was sort of like, yeah, I feel like there's something going on here, Dannyl. Okay, so then we go back to what's going on with Sonea and Taya. And this moment with Gerald is really weirdly, again, I feel like there's something sort of, or Lord Jullen, sorry. I feel like there's something that's like going on between Taya and Jullen. So you found yourself an assistant, he remarked. I thought Lorelyn refused your request. Sonea has offered her time of her own choosing. Shouldn't you be studying, Sonea? I should think the High Lord's novice would have better things to be doing than carrying boxes. Keeping her expression neutral, Sonea looked around. Can you suggest a better place to spend my spare time, my lord? His mouth twitched, then he sniffed. So long as the time is spare. He looked at Taya. I am retiring now. Good night. Good night, Lord Jullen, Taya replied. When the stern magician had left, Taya started toward the storeroom, and Sonea chuckled. I think he's jealous. Jealous? Taya turned and frowned. Of what? You've got an assistant, the High Lord's novice, no less. She lifted an eyebrow. You've put a high value on yourself. Sonea grimaced. That wasn't of my choosing, but I'd lay a bet that Jullen's a bit peeved you've got a willing helper. I don't know if that's exactly it or not. Stay tuned for further developments. So Taya is really tired, has circles under her eyes, and Sonea finally is like, are you okay? I can finish this by myself if there's other stuff that you need to get done and we can have this finished sooner. And at first Taya is like, are you kidding me? Really? You would just do this alone? And Sonea's like, yeah, that's fine. I don't care. And she convinces Taya to leave her, and Sonea manages to she's trying to break into the cabinet. And is looking at all of the joints and stuff to see if there are hinges that she can pull apart. And finally she decides that she's going to look at the base of it to see if there's something that she can do to get in underneath. And she lifts it and sees that there is a weird thing in the back of it. That there are two perfectly straight lines running down, and that there is a kind of lump. Something about the size of a textbook but made of wood was attached to the wall behind the cabinet. Stepping back, she took a deep breath and extended her power out and around the cabinet, taking care that her magic did not touch that of the lock. With the gentlest flexing of will, she lifted the cabinet upward. Frowning with concentration, she turned it away from the wall like a door and carefully set it down again, a few Farron escaping away from their webs in alarm. A Farron is a spider. I need to remember these. And what she finds in there is a bunch of stuff that is obviously meant for Acheron. This is some secret shit. Placed in a way in the back of this cabinet so that it can be reached from the opening in the wall behind the cabinet and the painting there. And when she unrolls one of the scrolls, it's a plan of the magician's quarters, a plan of the novice quarters, all of this really detailed. And then she finds the magics of the world, one of the early texts used in history class. Under the title was written in faded ink, High Lord's copy. A chill went through her. Suddenly she wanted to replace the book, put the cabinet back in place, and get out of the library as quickly as possible. But she does not do that, and she manages to go through this book and finds a paper bookmark, and it's marking this area where there are all of these hand-drawn maps. And there's maps for each level, and it's all indicating the secret passageways inside the school. And she wants to take it, but she realizes that because of the way that this is positioned, that it's meant for somebody to be able to come and retrieve it easily through the back of this opening. So who knows when they're going to come back for it, and they will notice it's gone. And also, if she tries to come back for it, like I'm trying to find the exact way that she words this, but basically it all boils down to the fact that here it is. She knew she could not memorize it. That was the other one, and that someone might return to the cabinet and notice it was missing. So she goes and makes a copy of it as quickly as she possibly could, like tracing it over it, and just barely manages to get it done before Taya comes back. So now she's got this like crazy map of all of these secret passageways, which is really, really rad. All right. So then we have the, lesson with Yikmo, which I pretty much talked about. So I think I'm just going to, skip over most of this. And, oh yeah. Then we have Tayend and, Dannyl with the sister. Tayend gets too drunk to like hang out with them. So, his sister, what is her name again? She, takes him on a tour of like the vineyard. And I really enjoy this sister of his, and I hope that she comes back into the picture again. But yeah, she tells him about the crush and all of that. And there's also like the investigation that Tayend and Dannyl are doing, reading some of the drawings, and he points at a glyph. These say something about the place the woman came from. He's finger tapped at a particular glyph, a crescent and a hand surrounded by a square with curved corners. I didn't know what this meant, but it was familiar, and it took a while before I remembered what it reminded me of. There's an old book in the great library that's so old the pages crumble to dust if you touch them too roughly. It belonged to a magician many centuries ago, Relend of Kimori, who ruled part of Eileen before Eileen was one country. Visitors would write their names and titles and purpose for visiting in this book, though most of it was the same handwriting, so I suspect a scribe was hired to make the names of those who couldn't write themselves. There was a symbol similar to this on one page. I remember it because it was made by a stamp, not a pen, and it was red. The scribe had written King of Charken next to it. Now, it's not unreasonable to think the woman in the tomb came from the same place. The glyph is so similar to the stamp. But where is this place called Charken? This is an old atlas Oren's great-grandfather owned. Look closely. And they see something named Shakendra, which is a place in Sachaka in the mountains. So they are pretty sure that is where Acheron went. And Daniel's like, well, we still need to follow our planned route. But And it's sort of even like, I'm not sure we're going to have time to go there. And Tayend is like, it's not that far. We definitely could. Even if we're a little bit late returning back, nobody's even going to notice. And when he says, I wouldn't have thought you'd want to be delayed going home, Tayend says, why not? And he says, isn't there someone waiting for your return? No, unless you mean librarian Erand. Nobody else? So you don't have your eye on somebody, as you hinted at Bear Aralade's party? The scholar blinked in surprise and looked at Dannyl sideways. I've got you curious, haven't I? What if I said that there's no one waiting for my return because this person doesn't know of my interest? You're a secret admirer, then. Perhaps. You can trust me to keep your secret, Tayend. I know. Is it Valend? No. Relieved, Dannyl shrugged apologetically. I've seen him at the library a few times. I'm trying to discourage him, Tayend said, but he thinks I'm only doing it because I'm keeping up appearances for you. Am I keeping you from pursuing the one you're interested in? Tayend winced. No, this person is, and that's when they get cut off. So Dannyl here and you know, you can read this as Dannyl being totally oblivious, and I think he really is oblivious to Tayend's admiration, but it does feel like Dannyl is asking him if he's interested in anybody, because he's low-key hoping Tayend is not, because he's a little bit jealous. Which, you know, again, you just, it's one of those subconscious things that I'm just like, oh, Dannyl, sweetie, baby. I want him to be happy. That's all I want. Okay, so Sonea is figuring out all of the corridors and all of the secret passages, and is doing that on all of her free time now instead of going to the library. Which I kind of feel bad for Taya, because I bet Taya unconsciously like got a little dependent on Sonea's help, and now she's like, I guess I'm doing all of this alone again. But yeah, the mechanisms for opening everything are like all of these hidden little levers and stuff. And it's just a really interesting, I'm really curious exactly what these are being used for, because we knew before, but we find out for sure later that Acheron is still using them and is very upset that she's in them. So what exactly is he doing? I'm super curious. So let's see. She winds up in one of the tunnels and is circling all over the place and finds like a bunch of trap doors to ladders so that she can go from one floor to another. And she's hoping that she can use these passages to avoid Regin and get from class to class or from place to place without having to pass in through the lion's mouth, basically. So I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work out now, because it seemed like she sort of had found a solution, and then Acheron tells her like to never ever come back in again. I'm just worried about this. All right, so I spoke to Viola again this afternoon, Tanya said suddenly. So Tanya is trying to befriend Viola, Sonea's servant, in order to get some information about how Sonea is doing. She told me that Sonea is well, though some mornings she looks tired. Meanwhile, Rothan is thinking about the fact that he's taking less Nemen, but that means he's waking up earlier in the morning and laying there like just worrying and anxious. So, that's worrisome. And then he gets a mental message from his son Dorian, who says that like all of these people out here are suffering from black tongue disease, I think is what he calls it. Yeah, an unusual strain of it. When it has passed, I'll be coming back for a short visit to bring a sample for Venara. So he's going to be visiting again. And, I'm sure that to a degree, this is just an excuse to come back and see Sonea as well. But it is pretty convenient. And this is when, it is Yalden. Yalden comes in to tell him about what's going on with Dannyl. Although when he starts telling Rothan thinks he's about to bring him some like bad news about Sonea. And Rothan also thinks that he forgets that there's a night room gathering that night. And that means that he has to really like cut back on the friggin' Nemen, because it's making him lose track of time and like become really forgetful. It was definitely time to stop taking Nemen. Perhaps he would try to sleep without it tonight. So Dannyl, all of this information about Dannyl, is just all speculation, but it's enough to sort of draw attention and just be a problem potentially. And Rothan sort of tries to be like, well, he's a grown-up and he could watch out for himself. But Rothan does think, you know what, I'm going to write him a letter just to warn him about what everybody's saying. Like, I'm sure it's going to wind up fine, and just letting it run its course is probably the best thing to do. But I may as well let him know that everybody's talking about this. And, Rothan is laying there worrying about his friend. And he even thinks to himself, what if the rumors were true? Which, it has to be something that he considers. And he thinks to himself, and I was surprised by this, the head of healers, Lord Garin, had told Rothan that men taking male lovers was a lot more common than people had thought. Like, the old healer had been surprisingly accepting of the practice, saying in his typical clinical fashion that there was no physical harm in an adult male relationship if both were free of disease. The social consequences, however, were far worse. Yeah, so that was a surprising thing, and I kind of got my hopes up, but then it comes with, like, he would be a social outcast, he'd lose his ambassador position, he wouldn't be offered any other role of that importance again, he would be excluded from projects, his experiments wouldn't get funding, he would be, like, just, teased and just basically made a friggin' pariah. And this leads to Rothan making up a bunch of Nemen and swigging it down, even though he had just been thinking, oh, I really need to quit this shit. So that's really bad. That's a real bad sign, and I am concerned about it. So then we get the visit from Captain Baron, who comes to see Lorlin. And Baron is, like, telling Lorlin that they're pretty positive about the fact that whoever is doing these murders is using magic, because they found burns on one of the bodies that look like strikes of some kind, magical strikes. He had typical burns, strike burns across his chest and arms, and his rib cage was crushed. Despite this, we were able to question him before he died. He said the murderer was tall and dark-haired. He was dressed in dark, strange clothing. And one of those, he points to the globe light here, those was floating in the room. He'd arrived home and heard his father shouting. The murderer had been surprised at his discovery and had struck out without hesitation, then fled through the window. Oh, and he was wearing and he points to Lorlin's ring. I could theorize for a million years about this, but the ring is mentioned a little bit later as well. When Dannyl is visiting that private library. So I sort of thought that this was like a proprietary spell, that this was something that, like, the High Lord had made up. But it's apparently, like, knowledge that's out there. So in this scene, when he's saying, like, oh, he was wearing a ring like yours, I'm like, oh shit, is there somebody who's, like, under Acheron's control? But then we find out later that this is not necessarily Acheron's magic. So there's somebody else out there who could be using a ring to communicate with someone. I don't know if they would be, forcing them to commit these murders, or if it would be some other thing. But this ring that I was so impressed by, that I thought was so cool, and I still do, it turns out is a lot more common than I thought. And that changes everything. And Lorlin is sort of, like, caught up in that idea. And he's thinking about, like, if Lorlin tried to hide the evidence of magic and it turned out that Acheron wasn't the killer, people would continue to die at the hands of a rogue magician. Eventually the murderer would be found, the truth would come out, and people would question why Lorlin hadn't done anything. You must investigate it yourself. Lorlin blinked in surprise. Acheron's mind voice was quiet as a whisper. He managed to stop himself from staring at the ring. Tell Baron that the evidence of magic must remain secret. If the public knows a magician has turned into a killer, it will generate panic and distrust. So Lorlin tells him to, like, keep this shit to yourself. And he thinks to himself, are you the murderer? Like, he thinks it at Acheron, and Acheron does not respond to him. Acheron, are you the murderer, though? I really still don't think you are, but I don't know why. I just don't know why I don't buy it, but I just don't. So Sonea winds up, like, trying to find her way through the passages, and she gets lost. And at first, she's fine with it. She's like, I'll find my way out eventually, and I guess I'll just explore while I'm wandering around. But when she finally gets to a doorway and opens it, she realizes that she's in that room under the High Lord's residence where she spied on him using, the knife on somebody and, like, taking their strength. So that's terrifying. And she's just, like, really flipping out and manages to close the door behind her and thinking to herself, like, Jesus, thank God he wasn't in there, because this could have been so bad. And I feel like that's gonna have to come up later. there's so much that's being thrown at me here. So many different, like, new pieces of information and new factors to consider. Okay, so then comes the Dannyl and Tayend going to this private library. And Dem Ladiri is the name of the guy. He's this little, like, 90-year-old man. And Tayend's not anticipating, like, really being that impressed with this library. He thinks it's probably going to be a bunch of, like, weird, strange curios, but not necessarily, like, information. But it turns out to be, like, this enormous place, also filled with curios, but also, like, this is a collection that the guild could be proud of, kind of thing. And he shows them his cataloging system, which I won't reiterate, but, you know, Jesus. So he starts talking to them about Charkin, King Charkin, and he finds a book about it, and starts, like, showing what is it? Oh, yeah. They followed, he says he has some artifacts related to this too, and this is when he shows Dannyl the ring. He came to me many years ago looking for information about the king of Charkin. He showed me this symbol, and this is Dem telling the two of them about Acheron. He showed me this symbol. The Dem held up the ring. Set into it was a dark red gem, and carved into the surface of the gem was a crescent moon next to a crude hand. But when I sent him a letter telling him what I had received, he replied that he was unable to visit because of his new position. The person who sent it said that according to legend, magicians can use it to communicate with each other without fear of being overheard. They didn't give their name. Sometimes people don't want their family to know they've given something valuable away. In any case, it's not a true gem. It's only glass. So Dannyl tries to, like, use it or get some, like, sense off of it, and he can't. There's nothing there as far as he can tell. So I'm really like, who is this from? What the fuck is going on here? And let's see, they get fed, and oh yeah, I like this, the Dem's library hadn't turned out to be the collection of useless oddities that Tayend had been expecting. And that's the end of that section. So then we come to Sonea. And Sonea winds up getting waylaid finally. She really makes a good play of it and ducks into one of the side passages. And as she's standing there, she feels like warm wind on her back. And she's sort of like, why is it warm? And then she fucking realizes that he's right behind her. Get out, he snarled. She hesitated. Couldn't he hear the novices? Didn't he understand that she would be walking into a trap? Now, he snapped, and don't enter these passages again. And she manages to leave, like, without running right into the crowd, which is unfortunately expanded to 20 novices now. But they find her anyway. And this is when Regin has his second awful idea. It turns out to be a extract from the leaves of this bush that's used for medicine. And it's the juice that's left over after you make the extract, and it's first of all stinks horribly, but also it causes, like, boils to erupt on your skin. It's like bubotuber pus, basically. And he has a little bottle, and so does everybody else. They all, like, manage to save theirs. And they chuck these bottles at her, and without meaning to, she thinks that her power has been worn all the way down. Without meaning to, she, like, explodes them back at everybody. The whole place is covered in it except for her. All of the other novices are, like, spitting on the floor because it got in their mouths. They have it in their eyes. It's all over their clothes and stinking. And Regin is, like, his face is, like, covered in red spots that are starting to bubble up. And, his eyes are, like, streaming, you know, the kind of thing like if you got maced, you know. And she manages to escape. Regin tries to be like, don't let her get away. But the other students are like, fuck that. I need to get these robes off because they stink so bad. And that is the end of chapter 32. So again, I'm just so relieved that we get to end this with, like, a victory. And I just hate him so much. And I can't help but wonder, with that kind of like sadistic streak and the kind of power that he has, surprising amount of power, like almost as strong as Sonea, is he gaining it from black magic? Because she's like sort of already said that she doesn't think Regin would have a problem with black magic. And I tend to agree. So that's my question really, is like, is that what's going on? Is he being like taught by Balkan? Is Balkan involved in this? I don't know what to think. So yeah, I'm going to wrap this up here. Thank you guys very much for coming. Let me check my calendar, but I think, I have an hour break and then I have, Veronica Mars coming up later on today. So I guess that people wanted to have, it's at 2:30. So I have like an hour and a half break, and then I will have, the 5th season later on in the evening. So guys, check that out and hang out with me for that one. And I hope that you have enjoyed this one, and I will be seeing you soon, hopefully after the Christmas break, with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.